What happened to America's most iconic cowboy shrine? The Roy Rogers Museum once stood as a tribute to a Hollywood legend, and then, just like that, it was gone. Was it money troubles, a family feud, or something even more heartbreaking? What really led to its final permanent closure will leave you questioning how we honor our legend. Stick around, because the truth behind this museum's shutdown isn't what you think. It was once the kind of place where legends lingered in glass cases, boots still dusty with history, saddles that once danced across the silver screen, and the echoes of America's favorite cowboy playing softly through the hall. But today, the Roy Rogers Museum is no more. Shuttered, silent, gone. For those who once made pilgrimages to this tribute to the golden age of westerns, its vanishing feels like a mystery wrapped in melancholy. How does a tribute to a national treasure simply fade away? Was it all about fading fame, a changing world, or something more profound? To understand what was lost, we have to rewind, way before fame cast its spotlight. Before the rhinestones and the roar of movie set, there was just a boy, Leonard Franklin Sly, born in a tent in Cincinnati in 1911. Yes, a tent. That was his first home, planted on a patch of dirt that would one day become Riverfront Stadium. No cameras, no applause, just cold mornings, mud-soaked shoes, and a father desperate to escape city life. So desperate, in fact, that Andy Sly built a houseboat from scrap wood and set off with his family down the Ohio River, chasing a dream that floated as fragile as the boat itself. By 1913, a devastating flood would change their course. The houseboat, battered but intact, was dragged onto dry land and became their home. They didn't call it poverty, they called it survival. And Leonard? He learned resilience before he ever learned to ride. By 1919, the Slys bought a small farm in Duck Run. There, Leonard discovered the two things that would shape his life: horses and music. A single horse, gifted by his father, stirred something in him. He and his mother used to yodel across the field, a homespun way to communicate. To others, it may have seemed quaint. To Leonard, it was the beginning of a voice that would one day echo across America. As he grew, so did his dream, though never in a straight line. He bounced between schools, worked in a shoe factory, tried night school, and eventually dropped out. The classroom couldn't hold him, but neither could the factory floor. His heart was already galloping wet, and so, when his sister Mary settled in California, Leonard followed. In a battered Dodge, and with dust in his pockets, he headed for Los Angeles. He didn't find stardom, not at first. What he found was a grind: gravel trucks, fruit picking, back-breaking labor. But when Mary encouraged him to try out for a radio show, he hesitated and then said yes. That moment, standing there in a Western shirt she stitched for him, guitar in hand, changed everything. He strummed, he sang, he yodeled. The crowd fell silent, then erupted. Soon he was in a band, the Rocky Mountaineers. It didn't last, neither did the next few, but something pulled him back, again and again, to the stage. In 1933, a reunion with Bob Nolan and Tim Spencer sparked something electric. They rehearsed endlessly, scraped together songs and harmonies, and then came Hugh Farr. With a new name, Sons of the Pioneers, they found their rhythm. Their harmonies were pure, their spirit unshakable. And in 1934, they exploded onto the scene with Tumbling Tumbleweeds and Cool Water. The West finally had its soundtrack. Leonard Franklin Sly had become a name in music. But what came next was seismic. In 1938, with cowboy star Gene Autry in a contract dispute, Republic Pictures launched a search for a new Western hero. Leonard auditioned and won. The studio rebranded him Roy Rogers, tipping the hat to Will Rogers, and gave him the lead in Under Western Star. The moment that film hit theaters, a new icon was born. He wasn't just a cowboy, he was the cowboy. The one who rode across Technicolor hills with a steady hand, a steady heart, and a horse named Trigger, who would go on to become a star in his own right. Trigger could rear, bow, even sign autographs with his hook. Children adored him. He became more than a movie prop. He was family. So when Trigger passed, Roy had him preserved, ensuring that the legend could still meet the fans who loved him. Because Roy didn't just live a story, he protected it. Roy was a phenomenon, but he was also a visionary. He negotiated his merchandise rights early on, a move almost unheard of, and it made him one of the wealthiest entertainers of his time. But more than that, it made him a brand that kids could wear, watch, and worship. He didn't do it alone. Dale Evans, his co-star and soon his wife, brought grace, humor, and unshakable belief to their partnership. Together they built a family that embraced both joy and sorrow. They lost a daughter, Robin, but turned their grief into advocacy. They opened their hearts, their home, and their spotlight to children in need. Their theme song, Happy Trails, was no hollow tune. It was a promise of better days, sung with conviction. By the 1950s, Roy wasn't just riding onto movie sets. He was galloping into America's living room. The Roy Rogers Show introduced him to a new generation. He played a sheriff, yes, but more than that, he played himself, a symbol of decency and strength when the world felt uncertain. So when the Roy Rogers Museum finally opened, it wasn't just a building, it was a cathedral of cowboy culture, a monument to grit, kindness, and the kind of storytelling that made you believe in heroes again. But how does a place built on so much love, so much legacy, collapse into silence? That's the mystery we're chasing. Because the fall of the Roy Rogers Museum wasn't about one bad decision. It was about a changing America, and whether we still have room for heroes who wear white hats and ride into sunsets not for glory, but for good. It began with a dream not of stardom, but of gratitude. Roy Rogers wasn't just a legend on the silver screen. He was the same humble man in real life, with a heart that beat for his fans. When he and Dale Evans opened their museum in 1967 in Apple Valley, California, it wasn't about cementing their fame. It was a thank you, an open door into their world, where every saddle, guitar, and award was a whispered memory of dusty trails and roaring applause. The museum wasn't glossy or grand, it was heartfelt, worn in like an old pair of boots, and filled with stories that only fans could truly appreciate. People came in droves, grandparents who remembered matinees, children wide-eyed at Trigger's lifelike pose, and parents reminiscing about simpler time. Walking through that museum was like stepping into a living postcard from the golden age of the web. Roy's hats, his guns, the Jeep Nellie Bell, all frozen in time. You didn't just see artifacts, you felt them. And when visitors rounded a corner and unexpectedly came face to face with Roy himself, still donning his iconic white hat in his twilight years, time stopped. That kind of magic doesn't happen anymore. But even legends aren't immune to time. As the 90s waned, so did attendance. Roy was aging, and though he still popped in to greet fans with the same warmth he always had, the world outside the museum was changing fast. Fewer kids knew his name. Westerns weren't headline material anymore. And museums, even ones built from love, still had bills to pay. It wasn't about passion, it was about sustainability. And that became a fight the Rogers family couldn't win alone. When Roy passed in 1998, the world mourned. President Bill Clinton even praised his legacy, calling him a beacon of courage and kindness. The museum suddenly felt more like a sanctuary. But even as fans poured in to honor his memory, a quieter reality was setting in. Without fresh interest from younger generations, the museum began slipping into nostalgia's shadow. In a last attempt to revive the dream, the Rogers family moved the museum to Branson, Missouri in 2003. On paper, it made sense. Branson loved old-school entertainment, and for a while, things picked up. But as one fan put it, you can't modernize a memory. Despite interactive upgrades and renewed energy, the truth was creeping in. Legacy alone couldn't keep the lights on. Roy had seen this coming. Before his passing, he told his kids not to hold on if it ever became too much. Dreams are precious, but so is practicality. That heartbreaking decision arrived in 2009. The museum was to close. The pieces, every memento, every cherished item, would be auctioned off. It felt like losing him all over again. Christie's handled the auction. The room was heavy with emotion. When Trigger's saddle and Roy's first guitar hit the block, you could feel hearts breaking. But then something beautiful happened. As the auction neared its end, a soft voice started singing, "Happy Trail." Slowly, others joined in. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't staged. It was a spontaneous farewell, a chorus of gratitude. That song became a eulogy, and the room, a chapel. Not all was lost. Patrick Gotch of RFD-TV bought Trigger to keep him on public display. Other pieces found homes with fans who saw the auction not as an end, but a continuation, like passing the torch to people who understood what Roy represented. Yet, for Dusty Rogers, who had curated the museum and lived in its walls, The closure was a personal ache. It meant letting go of a second home and of his father all over again. The toughest part? Watching pieces of their lives scatter. Dusty hoped to keep Trigger and Bullet together, maybe preserved in another institution, but that wasn't possible. Even though many items landed in loving hands, the unified story that the museum told, one filled with love, grit, and grace, couldn't be rebuilt. Still, the spirit found a way to live on. Sales of Roy's films and shows climbed again thanks to streaming platforms. Kids who never saw a cowboy in a theater were discovering one on a tablet. Fan conventions and cowboy festivals kept his image alive in parades and performances. And college professors began to recognize Roy as more than an entertainer. He was a case study in American culture, a pioneer who bridged radio, film, and TV like few others ever had. One unexpected revival came from the faith-based community. Churches that once welcomed Roy and Dale to speak continued to play their interview. Their values, kindness, hope, and faith resonated anew in an age hungry for sincerity. Tribute concerts, blogs, and even Sunday school materials kept their voices echoing long after the spotlight had dimmed. Back in Apple Valley, where it all began, the town still bears their fingerprint. Street names, plaques, and community events ensure that Roy and Dale remain part of the fabric. Even without the museum, the town itself tells their story. For the people who live there, the museum may be gone, but the memory feels just around the corner. The closure didn't mark the end. It marked a turning point. The physical space faded, but the legend only grew. Roy Rogers became something more than a man or a museum. He became an ideal, a feeling of home, a time when heroes were real and honor mattered. His voice, his values, and that iconic image of him riding into the sunset, still alive, still loved. In the end, it was never about the object. It was about the feeling you got watching him ride across the screen. That safe, steady presence that made the world feel all right. The museum may have fallen silent, but Roy Rogers never did. And the trail he blazed, it's still there. Just listen closely. When the curtain finally dropped on the Roy Rogers Museum, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a pause, a moment for America to reflect. And in that stillness, something unexpected stirred. The heartbreak of seeing the museum close triggered a wave of nostalgia that refused to fade. People didn't just remember Roy, they rediscovered him. As collectors carried off pieces of a legend, fans carried home memories too sacred to be priced. And in that unforgettable auction, one could feel the ache of a childhood fading into myth. But what if myths never really die? What if they're simply waiting for someone to tell their story again? Even as the doors shut, the spirit behind them spilled into the world. It wasn't about cowboy hats or revolvers. It was about value. Roy and Dale gave audiences more than entertainment. They gave them an ideal to reach for. That's why when someone softly began to sing Happy Trails at the auction's end, and voices swelled in harmony, it didn't feel like goodbye. It felt like a promise. Years passed, but the questions linger. What happens to legacy when pop culture moves on? What do we do when the world forgets the people who taught us to dream in sepia tone? Writers began revisiting Roy's legacy not with sentiment, but with scholarship. Film historians who once dismissed him began realizing that Roy Rogers didn't just wear a white hat. He defined what that hat meant for an entire generation. Suddenly, the King of the Cowboys wasn't just a nostalgic echo. He was an origin story. And just as the media started to quiet, the internet lit up. Fan forums brimmed with personal letters, photographs, and videos of families passing Roy's songs to their kids. Apple Valley transformed into a living memory of the man and his mission. Schools taught his code of honor. Monuments were raised. And in classrooms far removed from dusty trails, kids were learning about kindness and grit, because Roy once rode tall and sang about doing the right thing. But here's the twist you didn't see coming. Behind Roy's humility was one of the sharpest business minds of his era. He wasn't just Hollywood's most trusted cowboy. He was its original brand strategist. Long before luxury collaborations were a trend, Roy turned his values into a merchandising empire. He licensed everything from lunchboxes and guitars to comic books and toys. And he did it with purpose, always insisting that every product reflected the decency he stood for. In a world obsessed with clout, Roy built a financial fortress on trust. Let's look at the number. Roy Rogers wasn't just an entertainer. He was a brand powerhouse. His estate once included real estate holdings across California and Arizona, including a ranch that spanned hundreds of acres. He was known to fly in his private aircraft to charity events and film locations, keeping time with a collection of vintage Rolexes and gold Omega watches. His garage, a dreamscape of Americana, vintage Cadillacs, a custom Ford Woody wagon, and his iconic 1946 Jeep, Nellybell. He held investments in television syndication, music rights, and licensing, and was rumored to have had substantial insurance policies covering both his performing assets and charitable venture. The financial lesson? Roy diversified before Wall Street made it cool, turning fame into long-term security without ever selling out his value. And yet, for all that success, it was never about the money. His advice to his kids was simple: live with integrity, and the rest will come. Roy Rogers didn't chase wealth. He built it by staying true to his character. If today's stars want a blueprint for sustainability, they'd do well to study Roy's legacy. Create meaning, serve your audience, and let authenticity do the heavy lifting. As for Dusty Rogers, his emotional journey during the museum's final days reminded us that even heroes have children who mourn the loss of magic. But Dusty also carried forward something else: conviction. He knew the museum wasn't the legacy. The people were, the hearts it touched, the values it instilled. Somewhere, as Trigger stands proudly at RFD TV headquarters, and Bullet rests near him, fans still come to say thank you. They don't come for spectacle. They come for a reminder that decency, courage, and optimism still matter. And maybe, just maybe, we're not at the end of Roy's story. Streaming platforms are slowly bringing his films back. A new wave of documentaries explores not just his films, but his philosophy. Kids who never wore cowboy boots are learning to hum "Happy Trails" from grandparents who did. A digital museum has been proposed. Writers are dusting off forgotten script. Roy is galloping back, one pixel at a time. Because legends like Roy Rogers don't fade, they wait. And when the world needs a hero who believed in honor and hope, they ride again. And there you have it. The rise, the fall, and the final curtain of the Roy Rogers Museum. From glittering cowboy boots to dusty glass cases filled with forgotten treasure, it wasn't just a museum. It was a love letter to an era, to a man, and to a legend. But in the end, even legends need more than memories to survive. Financial struggles, changing times, and the heartbreaking weight of legacy all played a part in closing those doors for good. If you found yourself surprised, moved, or maybe just a little nostalgic, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel more than you know. Got thoughts about the museum or memories of Roy Rogers? Drop them in the comments. We love hearing your story. And hey, if you're into forgotten fame, behind-the-scenes Hollywood, or the legacy of icons, subscribe and tap that notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. We've got more wild tales from Tinseltown on the way. Some sweet, some scandalous, and all unbelievably true. Because in the end, like Roy always said, until we meet again, may the good Lord take a liking to you. Thanks for watching, and keep riding that trail of curiosity with us.